what I hear is about that the MIT Media Lab projects technology 5 years from now, and from the 5 years they project another 20 years or 30 years. How's that work? You know, how do you think so futuristic?
Well, I wish that it were true that we projected 5 years out. It's very interesting. In the 70s, we did project 5 years out, and everybody would say we were wrong, that the things we were working on would never be affordable. They would never be cost effective for 10 years or 20 years, and we were always wrong. They were cost effective within 3 years. But now technology and society have caught up, and they're faster than us. And so the things we work on, I wish were 5 years in the future, but mostly they're not. I don't think of us as working on a time scale, but rather we work more on a passion scale. So the laboratory consists of about 30 faculty members and about 140 graduate students. And each of those graduate students comes in with a passion of their own, of what they think the future ought to be and what they think that future ought to be like. Now, they all hope that it happens by the time they graduate. So they're not trying to reach 5 years into the future, but they're driven by that internal goal of what they think the future really should be. And sometimes it never happens. Sometimes it's 5 years away. Sometimes it's 30 years away. But through the interactions with our sponsors, and we have about 65 industrial sponsors of the research, the passion of the students gets directed towards useful goals, and eventually, we hope, becomes real.
What are some of the different major creations that have happened at the MIT Media Lab over the past 30 years that most people wouldn't know about?
Well, it's very hard to pinpoint the kinds of things that you didn't have one day, then the Media Lab came along and you had the next day. Because very often, we're crazy. Okay, we pursue things in very extreme ways, and what happens is derivatives of those become part of your everyday life. Let me give you an example. A long time ago, in the early 1970s, we were working on how to display text. How to display high-quality text on a computer. Now, recall, those of you who were still alive in those days and reading, that text looked very much like a telegram. Okay, the characters were terrible, and it was really a very, very paltry representation of words. So we developed what we called soft fonts, which were fonts that had the characteristics to make them as good as what you could read in a printed book or a printed newspaper. Those are now used in every computer that you see. And we did very early work on those kinds of things. In the 1980s, actually, I got the idea from Nicholas, really the founder of the laboratory, Negroponte, who said one day, Andy, why don't you put a movie on a compact disc? Compact discs in the 1980s were used for music. They could play an hour of music. So in 1987, I put one of the first movies onto a compact disc. Then I joined MPEG, that became a standard, and now those movies are part of your life. Now, they didn't use my algorithm, but we had a lot to do with making that kind of thing start. Very occasionally, the students come up with ideas that you start to see as products. One of the students came up with one of the craziest ideas I've ever heard of called Clocky. And Clocky has become very popular now. And what it is an alarm clock. Mm-hmm. And when the alarm rings and you press the button to take another 5 minutes of rest, the clock jumps off the table and runs across the room. And the idea is that you have to now get up and find the clock. So it's a clock that helps get you out of bed, not just wake you up. And that's become one of the hip products. Another group of students did a game called Guitar Hero. And it was just some work that they were doing with music and physical interfaces to systems. And Guitar Hero became one of those kinds of bestsellers. So the work in the laboratory goes two ways. Sometimes it manifests itself as toys, games, and products, and sometimes it just becomes part of your everyday life years after we hoped it would.